All right, shalom to the elect of Israel. I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. And what I said was all the praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, who is the Heavenly Father, in the name of His Son Yahweh Shai, who is the Messiah, in the name of the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that were well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. In this lesson, I wanted to go into the story of these men here, you know, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, these were Israelite men during the time of the Babylonian captivity, and they stood up for righteousness, man. They didn't fold. Okay, and in these times to come, we're gonna have to have the same spirit that these men had. If not even more. You know. So I wanted to go into it, man, to encourage brothers, and Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and uplifting as well, man, because this definitely was a display of some real courage right here, man, of the Lord. Some courage that these men had and the fear of the Lord, man. So, just going to get some background real quick. So this is the book of Daniel, chapter 1. I'm going to read down to verse 7. And it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. Okay. And, let me just see if I could, I have my computer here. Let me just see if I could pull up some back or some other precepts, regarding this. 2 Kings 24 and 2. I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, in his days Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and Yahweh sent. Salaki for any background noise you hear. All right, but verse 2, it says, Salaki, just double checking something, right? And it says, and Yahweh sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and set them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Okay. Let me get another one. Just some I have written down. 2 Chronicles 36 and verse 6. I'm going to start at verse 5. It says, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of Yahweh his power. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in fetters to carry him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried the vessels of the house of Yahweh to Babylon and put them in his temple. All right, so that's the some background right there. All right, so basically, so this was going into the Babylonian captivity. All right, so back in Daniel 1, starting in verse 1, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of the Most High, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his power, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Verse 3, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, if I'm saying that right, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. So these three men, Hananiah, Shadrach, and Meshach, all right, they had also were given Babylonian names, or different types of names. Which for Hananiah it was Shadrach, for Mishael it was Meshach, and Azariah was Abednego. All right, when you look up these names, Hananiah in the Hebrew is Hananiah, okay, and it means God is favored, okay. I'm looking this up as I'm going right now. I've seen it before, but I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I think Mishael, I'm going to look it up. Mishael in the Hebrew is Maya Sha'ala, and it means who is what God is. Okay? Who is what God is. All right? Or who is what the Most High is. And then Azariah is Isaiah, which means Yahweh has helped. Izar meaning Hebrew, it's like Izar meaning help. And Yah is like the short version of the Heavenly Father's name, Yahweh. Okay? So, that's that. Let me just see what the Babylonian names mean. They got them up here, or, let me just see what their other names mean. They got them up here written in Hebrew. So, I'm try to see what that's about. Daniel says was given Belteshazzar, Bala Tazar, and that means Lord of the Straightened Treasures. I'm just getting it for edification's sake. That's all. All right, Shadrach, which means royal or the great scribe. All right, and Mishael was given Meshach, Mayashak, which means guest of a king. Bear with me. Alright. And Abednego, Ibad Nagawa, means servant of Nebo. Alright. So, leaves these three men. Now I'm gonna go ahead and jump to chapter 3. Okay. Going through this story once again, because we coming to the times where this type of situation is gonna happen again. With this MOTB, man, with the M of the beast. Okay, this type of situation is gonna happen again. This devil, the so-called white man, he's gonna force. He's gonna make it mandatory. In other words, force everyone in the world to take this MOTB. Okay, let me just get that real quick while I'm at it. All right, this is the book of Revelation, chapter 3 and verse 10, and it says, "Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth." Okay, and that hour of temptation is when this so-called white man makes it mandatory to take that charagma, that sihip. Okay. Let me just look up this word temptation. When you look it up here and you go into the etymology, all right. Let me see. Is it right here? How many times you gotta go to the etymology? Okay, yeah. When you go into the etymology twice, it should bring you to Strong's G3984. Right, and in the box where it says root word etymology, it says from the base, and then it gives you another word, but it says through the idea of piercing. Okay, and when they give you this charagma, they have to pierce through your skin. They have to make an incision, a cutting. You see, but Revelation 3 and 10 again. So this is how we know that this is part of how we know that the hour of temptation has to do with this micro sihip, man. When they make it mandatory, is because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. So this time that we're coming into is going to be It's gonna affect the whole world. Okay, it's gonna be upon the whole world, not just in America. All right, but the whole world is going to experience the hour of temptation. Okay, and in this time, we're gonna have to really stand strong and trust in Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, and be willing to give up our lives if need be. All right, we're back in Daniel, and so as we read this, you know, um, remember, that our forefathers had to experience like things. Okay, of either bowing down or laying down. Okay, but the Lord was always there. All right, so you know as you read this, it should comfort you, okay, and encourage you, so when this time comes, you should, Lord willing, you stand strong. So you like-minded brothers out there. But it's the book of Daniel, chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So Nebuchadnezzar here is making a idol, okay? He's making an idol, okay? And he's calling all these people, to come around and to this image that he's setting up, this idol. Verse 3. Then the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud. Let me look up this word herald. Okay. It's Karawaz, herald. Alright, let me just type it, see what it means here online. Herald, it says, an official messenger bringing news. Yeah, basically. So, going back, right? Down 3 and 4, it says, Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. All right, so this herald that, came, all right, and basically told all the people, when you hear this, when you hear, it's all kinds of music and everything, you have to bow down to this idol that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Okay? And, and then he's basically was saying, that anyone that doesn't is going to be put into a burning fiery furnace. Verse 7, it says, Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 8. Now, it says, Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king of Slakia. Verse 9 again, it says, They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king. Right? And it said, men came to accuse the Jews, right? It says, Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. It says, There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Once again, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Okay? It says, These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. So basically, hold up. Salaki. So basically, You know, they came and basically it was told Nebuchadnezzar that, look, you set up this image, you set up this idol, and you commanded everyone to bow down to it. But there are these three Jews over here that aren't. You know, there are these three Jews that you set up that aren't doing it, right? And so now Nebuchadnezzar is upset. He's pissed off, and now he wants them to be brought before him. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, It is true, O Shadrach. No, he said, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast in. It's like it says, I'm going to read that verse again, verse 15, Salakia. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? All right. This is, by the way, this is the same way, Esau feels, man. He feels like ain't nobody gonna, deliver us out of his hands, man. Okay, this man, his pride is too high. As it says in Obadiah 1, who shall bring me down to the ground? I'm gonna just get that real quick, because I got the scriptures right here. All right, so bear with me as I get it. I'll just pull it up here. It's just quicker if I pull it up here. Obadiah 1 and verse 3. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Okay? And that's how these devils feel. The elites, they feel like, nobody can, defeat them. All right? And we're in this last captivity, and this devil is, he's that wicked king we're facing right now, but the King of Kings is going to come and take him out of the way very soon. All right? But back in Daniel chapter 3 and verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Let me look that up in another translation. Look that up in the NLT. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. All right? Yeah, all right. So let me keep reading. Verse 17. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Okay? And so, that's the thing, right? These men, they know that if they didn't bow to this, idol, that they were going to be thrown into a fiery furnace, be put to death. All right, but they didn't care. You see, they didn't care. That faith is strong, man. Okay, their faith was real strong. Okay, they believe that the Lord was able to deliver them from the burning fiery furnace. You see, but they, but either way, they pretty much said, like, even if he didn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down to this image or nor worship your gods. You see, they had that resolve, man. Let me look that word up. If I'm using the right word. Resolve. It says settle or find a solution to, or decide firmly on a course of action. Yeah, their minds were made up. They were determined. Okay, as some of the synonyms say here. Okay, they were determined that they're going to follow Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. All right, they were determined they're going to follow the Lord. And and not bow to this image. Okay, and the thing is, in these last days, that's what we have to have too. Okay, because this gonna man, this gonna be some this is the end. All right, this is the end. Okay, this is the end, man. This is another word, resolute. It says admirably purposeful, determined, and unwavering. Yeah, that's how we have to be in this faith, determined and unwavering. Okay, these men were determined and unwavering. They were ready to put their lives on the line, man. And that's how you got to be with this truth. You have to be ready to put your life on the line for this truth. This is how serious it is. Don't think that it's not you're not gonna get persecuted. As Yahweh Shah said, if they persecute him, they're gonna persecute us. All right. But you know that was as a side note, kinda. But I really was trying to focus this lesson, on the MOTB. Okay, about we're gonna have to have that that resolve in these last days, man. Okay, you know, the same type of resolve they had, that same determination that they had, to not bow down to this image, you know. And I'm gonna come back to this, but let me get something real quick, because look, as it said, right? Let me pull it up again. Daniel 3, all right, because Nebuchadnezzar, right? It said that this herald came along. I'm going to read the verse 4 again. It says, Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages. Did not we read in Revelation 3 and 10 that the hour of temptation, all right, that time is going to be upon the whole world, that everybody, every people, nation, and language is going to have to experience, the mandation, if I'm using the right word, the mandation of the charagma, of the sihib. You see? It says, verse 5, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right? So, basically, he was telling them, like, you don't fall, when you hear this, you have to bow down to it. Okay? And there's going to be a punishment if not. All right? And look, when this devil makes it mandatory, lots of people are going to take it. Lots of people are going to take it, man. But see, the elect is going to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not going to take it. They're not going to bow down to Esau, man. It's not that's something they're not going to do. Okay? So let me get that. Revelation chapter 13, starting in verse 16. And he, the so-called white man, causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. So everyone, basically. Free and bond meaning in jail and not or not. It says to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that word mark, as we go into all the time, all right, is the Greek word charagma. And it says a stamp, an imprint, and mark. All right, but it says a scratch or etching, and etching goes back to engrave, which means an incision. All right, and that's what they're gonna do. They give you a that's what they are gonna do. They give you they cut into your flesh to give you that charagma. You see. But as we in verse 17 says what? Because as there was a punishment for not bowing down to that idol, right? The punishment for not, there's going to be part of the punishment for not taking it. Verse 17, it says, And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Okay, so basically without this charagma, right, people won't be able to function in society. You won't be able to buy anything, sell anything, and buy stuff for your house or anything like that, or your, family. All right, if you don't take it, okay. None of that, man. You're gonna basically be like an outcast. All right. You have to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and be willing to, um, willing to be outcasted. Because if you take it, verse Revelation 14, verses 9 through 10 is going to happen to you when it says, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of the Most High, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb." All right. So if you take it, you're going to get nuked. Okay. And also, as it says for some people that take it, right? Revelation 16 and 2. "And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image." Okay, so, some people that take this charagma, they're going to get, some type of, sore, some type of nasty, boil, ulcer-like sore, man. Okay? So, the thing is, look, and the thing is, when you take this charagma, you take it, you lost all chances of getting delivered when Yahweh Shah returns. Now you're just, slated for death. Okay? And this is, this is the seriousness, the severity of taking it. Okay? You're not supposed to take it, man. As it tells us in our law. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 2. I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, "And the Most High spake all these words, saying, I am Yahweh thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." Okay, I didn't mean to get this. I was just kind of jumping the gun, but anyways, I'll get it still. Verse 3. It says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." All right? So you're not supposed to have any other gods except for Yahweh. You're not supposed to worship any other gods except for Yahweh, all right, and Yahweh Shai. Now, do you understand? If you take this, you're basically calling Esau your God, man. All right? This is kind of an example right here. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 21, right? And it's regarding the Hebrew servant, okay? But still, Exodus 21, and the point still stands in starting in verse 5 through 6. "And the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door or unto the door post. And his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." And an awl is like an ice pick. Okay? So basically, if you you take it. So basically, like Salakia, jumping in my mind is trying to go other places, Salakia. But anyways, all is like an ice pick. So basically, once the master had bored his servant's ear through with this awl, the servant is basically calling his master forever. His master is basically his master forever. And you're doing the same thing if you take this charagma, okay? And when you go back to that word charagma, Revelation 13 and 16, right? That word charagma there, okay? It says a stamped and imprinted mark. It says, "Of the mark stamped on the forehead or the right hand as the badge of the followers of the Antichrist." Now the thing is, ain't no such thing as the Antichrist. The one man, rising up like that. That's not in the scriptures. All right, being anti-Messiah, all right, is basically anyone who's against Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai. So Christians are anti-Messiah, scoffers. Especially the so-called white man. All right, so you can look at this and say, this charagma, all right, is going to be for those that basically, that are, so basically when you take it, you're basically your allegiance is pledged to Esau, and now he's basically your master forever, man. Okay, and this goes show us a physical thing, but once again, that resolve is that you're supposed to you're supposed to have that resolve, that you're not going to bow down to this devil, man. We've seen a lot of people fold during the C19 with the jab, okay? A lot of people folded with that. Okay, but they didn't have that resolve. You see, but the point is, as we read in the law just now, how you're not supposed to have any other gods except for the Lord. You're not supposed to bow down to any other gods except for the Lord, except for Yahweh and Yahweh Shai, right? You know, so you gotta do the same thing with this. Basically, what I mean is, when it comes to the devil, you can't bow down to him neither. You can't take his charagma. You're not supposed to be doing that. Okay, and a lot of people are gonna take it. Don't be surprised if your family member starts taking it. If you're a brother who has kids or anything, and your children are somewhat kind of grown, and doing stuff on their own a little bit, don't be surprised if they take it. Your wife, no matter what, even if how harsh it comes down to, even if they're telling you gotta take it to feed your family, or your wife has tears in her eyes or everything, telling you to take it. Your children are crying, all right, or your mother or whoever so near to you telling you to take it, you can't do it, because then you would have lost all chances at salvation. Exodus 23:2. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to rest judgment. All right, but you're not supposed to be following a multitude of people to do wickedness, man. All right, that's just not what it's supposed to be. Okay, it's the book of Acts chapter 5 and verse 29. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey the Most High rather than men. Okay, and that's the same attitude that we gotta have. We're supposed to obey the Lord rather than man. This devil, the so-called white man, he's just a man. Okay, but we understand that this devil is the elites of Esau are the ones in power right now, and they are trying to bring forth this NWO. And they want to have everyone charagmaed up, hipped up, okay? And they're gonna make it mandatory at one point, and you gotta refuse it, And if you don't, well, we read the punishment to you, man. Okay, just read the punishment. So, but let me just finish. What happened with these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's just see if the Lord left them hanging. So, as they told Nebuchadnezzar that they wouldn't, worship his image, the idol that he set up, right? Verse 19, Daniel 3:19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. Read that in the NLT. It says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. All right. It says he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Okay. So he was upset, man. All right, and he wanted and so he commanded that the furnace that they would be thrown into was going to be heated 7 times more than it usually would be heated. So it was like he wanted to make an example almost. Verse 20, it says that he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery flame. It's like into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen. It says, in their hats and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Right? It says, verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. So basically, he's like, look, didn't we just cast 3 men in here? But I see 4 men in the midst of this furnace walking around, and they ain't hurt. right? And it says in the form of the fourth myth, it says in the form of the fourth is like the Son of the Most High, okay? And let me just see something real quick. All right. Verse 26, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High, power, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. Now look, verse 27. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. You see, so, look, these men were thrown into this furnace for their obedience to the Most High, right? And afterwards, they came out, and the fire, they weren't hurt, their hair wasn't singed, the smell of the fire didn't get on them, their coats didn't, burn up or nothing like that. They had on, so they were fine. The Lord was with them, man. All right, so you gotta understand in these last days, the Lord is gonna be with His elect. Okay, you sincere, like-minded brothers out there that teach the doctrine that GMS teaches. The Lord gonna be with you, man. Especially when when all hell break loose in this charagma, this hour temptation is upon the world. Okay, but it says, look at the generations of old. Ecclesiasticus, also known as Sirach, chapter 2, verse 10. Look at the generations of old and see, did ever any trust in the Lord and was confounded. Look at the accounts of old, man. Look at the, stories of the men of old, right? And see if any trusted in the Lord and was confounded, all right? It says, or did any abide in his fear and was forsaken? Or whom did he ever despise that called upon him? So basically, the Lord was always there for his men, all right? And this account we read in, all right, is one of many accounts that prove that. You see, so in these times, remember this, man. The Lord is always going to be there for His. All right, that's why it says, did ever any trust in the Lord and was confounded? And that's a rhetorical question because the answer is no. So the Lord is always going to be there for His. Even when you're going through stuff, tribulation, all those type of things, man. Okay, the Lord is always going to be there for His. You got to believe that. You have to trust it. All right, I have testimonies how the Lord came through for me. Brothers do. We all do, man. Verse 11, for the Lord is full of compassion and mercy, long-suffering, and very pitiful, and forgiveth sins, and saveth in time of affliction. All right, so that was, and when this hour of temptation comes, and, we're kicked out, basically separated from society, all right, you got to trust that the Lord is going to come through. All right, He's going to take care of His men. He's not going to leave you stranded out there. You're standing up for Him, so why would He leave you stranded out there like that? He's going to feed you, give you things to drink. As Yahweh Shai said, take no thought for your life. Okay? So, I just wanted to do a quick lesson on that. Lord willing, this camera recording storage didn't mess up so I could upload it. But, hey, with that, giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone every well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.